my workshop is all about teaching standards. So as I introduced in my 1 minute, and I think I met that 1 minute brief, that this workshop is about the adult community education sector. And if you're not familiar with that sector, you think education, tertiary, where the bit that you probably can't see, probably not always funded, non-formal, informal, very community-based. And when you think about teaching standards within that context, we didn't have any in 2010. So, you were freestyling hard if you were out there teaching whatever. But in terms of a sector being very diverse, we didn't have any teaching standards. So in this time that we've got together, I don't want to be up here standing and talking the whole time, but I really want to use it as an opportunity for us to engage in understanding standards, engage in defining what quality means, and engage in thinking about what the learner can expect in terms of quality learning, wherever they are in education. For us, the statement was, it doesn't matter if you're not getting a qualification or a job. Quality should never be compromised. So that's been the challenge for the last 6 years, is selling that to a very diverse sector, volunteers, paid, non-paid, part-time, full-time, all the time teachers and educators in our sector. So that's my workshop. All right. So why have standards? I just said, because we didn't have any. What are standards? Here it is. It's expectations of expertise and performance. So very much like the formal sector, in the ACE sector, it's the same. That we had a discussion across the sector and said, what do you think standards are? This is what they said. It's about expectations that a learner has the right to expect. Now think about the ACE learner, perhaps didn't finish school, had different experiences, negative experiences at school. So the pressure of the ACE educator is, don't repeat that negative experience again for them. So thinking about what the learner has a right to expect. It's also about what the provider has a right to expect or can expect from any tutor, educator that's working with them. And of course, our stakeholders will have an expectation around standards, and the sector has to commit to it. So what I'm going to share with you or ask you is to think about, so what are your expectations of quality learning? You've just had an experience there. We've been around the country for the last 5-6 years and asked our sector to draw up their own standards. This is what they said, know your what, know your stuff. And then we added the brackets, epistemology, because we're trying to build capability in that area. Another standard they said is know your how. Do you know your pedagogy? Do you have access to a big toolbox where you can reach in and say, yep, I'm going to use that today, or that one doesn't work, put it back. The science of our teaching and learning. And keep that in mind in terms of the cultural competency question, because I'm a New Zealand-born Pacific person. So what does that mean for me in terms of teaching and how you're going to engage with me as a learner? They also said you need to know your learner. So the social, the cultural capital, and using that information to co-design. So, in the A sector, I talked about freestyling, but really it can be a bit of a blank canvas. As literacy practitioners, we know you don't know who the learner is. So how do you get to know the learner? And then how do you use that information to tailor learning? It's harder, it takes longer, but we need to think about, is the learner better off as a result of that? And we need to have a commitment to lifelong learning. So our role of Aotearoa is professional development. These standards have been around since 2011, and I'm going to show you our ACE standards so you can have a look at them. But it's been a hard journey because of the diversity of our sector. So I remember, Catherine, I think it was your PowerPoint, thinking about what are the drivers to PD? What are the incentives? I have to. I'm funded to. But for us in this sector, our learners have already been, had a negative experience. We can't afford to repeat that again. So we have to be creative. We have to think about if we're working in a prison and the only cultural capital, social capital they have is about running a tinny business, We'll talk about strategic planning with them. Unpack their knowledge and use that as the teachable moment, as Stanley has referred to for us. So have a look at the 11 standards and think about how they apply to you. Are they relevant? But I really want you to interrogate the question around the cultural competency lens. Do you see that in here? Or if not, what do you think should be included? So a few minutes to have a chat with the person next to you. You don't have to look at all of them, but just so you can see, we have 11.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was one of the, we thought that was a really good one and key for reflective practice of practitioners.
Yeah.
So it's a good example of how the standards can be used.
Yeah. I'm glad I came here. I don't know.
I think of our
I don't know which
training.
rock I was under.
Well, I was actually somewhere else. They're like, you're down in that room.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like this because it,
Makes you reflect that, especially community education stuff.
yeah.
Because that's where
You
we
know
come
how
from.
hard and fast and what is quality?
Yeah.
And that's our challenge, is talking about quality without people feeling intimidated by it.
Yeah.
Because it's not about what you're doing wrong, it's about identifying what you're doing well and what are the other areas that you want to develop.
Exactly. So these are going to be really relevant, eh?
Yeah, very much so.
Thank you.
How are we going?
Awesome, but strong know-how. How do we deal with this stuff?
How to do it?
Yeah.
So we'll come back to that. That's a good question to ask, is how to do it. And thinking about if you're a tutor who's never been trained, where do you fit into these standards?
And then where do you start?
And where do you start?
And like you were saying, if you Halangi and you come into the Tongan community, and then there's all the challenges around the culture. And the
So what else do you have to learn?
Because I was telling you, coming from our service provider organization, we focus on our Tongan community. That's part of it. Teachers and learner have to share the common values and etc. Palangi don't understand.
Yeah. And ako is very embedded in Tongan culture as well. So is it the same as Māori? Because ako is a concept that's used in our education system, but is it the same as the Tongan concept of ako?
So does Tonga have the same word?
Very common across Polynesia, the Pacific.
It's the same word? The same
Cook Island, Tongan, Samoan, very similar.
So this is awesome. We're just trying to work out, things, how to get there.
How to get there. Well, hold that question, you'll get to ask it, So a lot of the conversation that I've had to have with the resistance, as I call it, has been about, what do we agree on? The learner. The learner must be better off. And then we work our way backwards from that conversation. Not all of the sector, they like the standards because they're voluntary. Oh, sweet, I don't have to do it. But then there's a part of the sector, and interesting, it's often the non-funded or the very small organisations, they're hungry for standards. They're so hungry to provide quality teaching. They will pay out of their pocket to access training so that they can be better teachers. They'll give up 80 hours to do an initial training to go and represent these quality teaching standards. And then it varies as we go through. So I think we recognise that within the context of the teaching standards that it's part of something bigger, that there are some harsh realities of implementing those standards. My background is in teaching and training tutors. And I had to be really impartial when I was a learner because I wanted to pass. And when I had these standards and my teaching background behind me, and I'm looking at a teacher in front of me that didn't reflect this. And I thought, well, how does the system enable us to give feedback so that teaching quality can improve? And doing it in a way that is mana enhancing. that's the question for all of us, is how do we do that? How do we use these standards? And again, I go back to the cultural competency question, because when we were doing the consultation around these standards, it became very prescriptive. When you get a Māori learner, you have a full-on pūwhiri, then you're going to talk to them like this, you're going to wear this. Those were the kinds of conversations that we were having when we were developing teaching standards. And likewise with Pacifica, it became very prescriptive. When you get a Samoan, make sure you're going to wear your jandals and your lava, and you're going to say talofa. And I sat there thinking, what? You don't even know who the learner is yet. And so, for us, the next step of our teaching standards, they're 6 years old, we're reviewing them this year. So we've got a good year to go back, and you've started that process today, so thank you very much. And welcome your feedback at any time. I've been talking with TEC about our teaching standards, and also Stanley's on a professional development steering group, which is our governance body that oversees the contract that we have with TEC that pays for the development of these generic PDs tools. So we've got access to some good networks, and we've got access to your experience and expertise as well. So I welcome that feedback after this workshop. Please continue. I don't get offended. Tell me, like I was asked, is this going to suck? Tell me. But give me the reason why. And then help me with a solution so that we can look at creating something that is always about the learner benefit, but also something that's realistic, because we're applying it in such a diverse context across ethnicities, across the formal and non-formal tertiary sector. We're working with families. So how does this reflect the reality of implementation in that context?